Hello, I'm John, and this is Must Read More. Today I've got a tag to do. It's the Beauty in Books tag, created by the Linguist Library and to readers it may concern. He's the one who tagged me, and he's been incredibly generous and encouraging to me while I've been starting out on this Booktube journey. So I'd like to thank him for that. I'd also like to thank him for tagging me, because this is my first tag. So I'm just going to dive right into it. So the first prompt is beauty in concept. And I chose this, which is The Millennium Project by Marshall T. Savage, with an introduction by Arthur C. Clarke. And I tried to read this book a few years ago, and I really couldn't get into it. But I think it has a beautiful concept, which is that Marshall wanted to, he wrote this whole book. He planned out a way that humans could populate the galaxies of the universe, starting with the planets of our own solar system and moving out to the nearest galaxies, and from then on, a very long-term project. And he spelled out how we would have to maybe, let's see, I think he said we'd have to wear kind of jumpsuits made out of algae, and we'd have to eat algae and drink algae and build a space ladder. And I really have to say I don't really know if colonizing the galaxy is possible or even desirable. There are some people who really feel it's important to keep the human species going on and on forever, but I guess I've always kind of been somebody who looks at it from the other end, which is that life is finite anyway. So, but I mean, if people want to, because eventually all the stars are going to burn out, and the galaxies will move too far apart. And a few years ago, I really got into astrophysics, and I think I nearly fried my brain trying to overcome the vast distances and the resources necessary for intergalactic travel. But I really like this book, and he really got down into the science. Unfortunately, I don't really know how accurate it is or anything like that, and I've never heard anybody else talk about it. And this is the only copy I've ever seen. So yeah, I thought that was kind of a neat concept for a book, a beautiful concept that somebody could feel so much love for the human species, and they would really want to go out and populate the galaxy, even if it doesn't intrigue me all that much. So my next book is, this next one is Beauty in Opening Line. I should have put this notebook somewhere better. And I chose this book, Goodbye Darkness, a memoir of the Pacific War by William Manchester. And I'm going to try to read for you the opening line, which I personally think is the best opening to any war memoir I've ever read. And this book could have been in the Beauty Amidst Pain prompt also, but I chose something else there. So I'm going to read this opening paragraph for you. Let's see. The dream started... No, I'm so sorry. Let me redo that. Our Boeing 747 has been fleeing westward from darkened California, racing across the Pacific toward the sun, the incandescent eye of God. But slowly, 3 hours later than West Coast time, twilight gathers outside, veil upon lilac veil. This is what the French call le hair bleu. Aquamarine becomes turquoise, turquoise lavender, lavender violet, violet magenta, magenta mulberry. Seen through my cocktail glass, the light fades as it deepens. It becomes opalescent, crepuscular. In the last waning moments of the day, I can still feel the failing sunlight on my cheek, taste it in my martini. The plane rises before a spindrift. The darkening sky, broken by clouds like combers, boils and foams overhead. Then the whole weight of evening falls upon me. Old memories, phantoms repressed for more than a third of a century begin to stir. I can almost hear the rhythm of surf on distant snow-white beaches. I have another drink, and then I learn, for the 100th time, that you can't drown your troubles, not the real ones, because if they are real, they can swim. One of my worst recollections, one I had buried in my deepest memory bank long ago, comes back with a clarity so blinding that I surge forward against the seatbelt, appalled by it, filled with remorse and shame. I am remembering the first man I slew. That's powerful stuff. And this book is laced with all kinds of... William Manchester is he was just a beautiful writer. He really had a way with words, and in fact, so much so that I chose 2 of his books for this, and I didn't even realize it until I got ready to do this. And the next prompt is beauty in character, and I chose really this is one of a 3-volume set, but I chose this one. It's The Last Lion, Winston Spencer Churchill, Alone, 1932 to 1940. And I thought I might read just a little bit of it here, because, of course, this is the beauty in character prompt, and Churchill was definitely someone with character, both good and bad. I'm just going to read a little bit here. There, among 80 sheltering acres of beech, oak, lime, and chestnut, stands the singular country home of England's most singular statesman, a brilliant, domineering, intuitive, inconsiderate, self-centered, emotional, generous, ruthless, visionary, megalomaniacal, and heroic genius who inspires fear, devotion, rage, and admiration among his peers. At the very least, he is the greatest Englishman since Disraeli, a quaint survivor of Britain's past who grapples with the future because he alone can see it. His past is illustrious. In the House of Commons he has, at one time or another, held every important ministry save those of Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary. Now, however, he is a backbencher, an elected member of Parliament excluded from the Cabinet. In his 58th year, he is already regarded as an anachronism. He first became a household word as a gallant young British officer, a loyal subject of Queen Victoria, handsome and recklessly brave, serving alongside the Buffs in battles on India's northwest frontier, with Kitchener at Khartoum, and in the Boer War. All symbols of the nation's imperial pride, which he fiercely defends despite flagging allegiance elsewhere in the realm. He is mocked for failures which were not his, notably his strategy to force the Dardanelles in 1915. He seems less a figure of the 20th century, which he loathes, than of the 19th, or reaching even farther back, of Renaissance versatility. The wide sweep of his interests and activities embraces literature, painting, philosophy, hunting, polo, military science, the history of the United States, even architecture, bricklaying, and landscaping. Indeed, many of the shining ponds and pools and the happy waterfalls between the Weald and the Manor were created by him, wearing hip-high Wellingtons and excavating the rich earth with his hands. So, a lot of people love Churchill and a lot of people loathe him, and there's, pretty much a good reason for both of those things. I'm not going to go into them here, but this was the first multi-volume biography that I ever read, and it has a special place in my heart. It may actually have been the first biography I ever read, come to think of it. I read it when I was 18 or 19, I guess. And there's William Manchester. So the next prompt is beauty amidst pain. So This one is, I'm not entirely sure how to go into this one, but I'll just show the book. The book is 102 Minutes by Jim Dwyer and Kevin Flynn. And that was a very terrible day. I was 8 years old in Mrs. Mitchell's class in 2001. And so I've had to learn everything about 9/11 as I've grown older. But although there was fear and pain, and it was a terrible day, and there were men with hatred in their hearts who committed a vile act, it was also a day when complete strangers ran towards when people ran towards danger to save complete strangers without any thought whatsoever for their own lives. These are not just, people who worked for the fire department or who were in the police department. These were just people who worked in offices, people who just happened to be there. They stopped and they helped people. There were firefighters still going up while they were calling for them to come down because the buildings were going to collapse. There were people, who came from all over the country to help clean up and to try to save lives. And I find, I'm trying not to get too deep into it here because I get kind of emotional about it. I get kind of emotional about the idea of selflessness in the face of danger, trying to help other people you've never even met and you'll probably never see ever again. So I think that in the, particularly in the people who gave their lives trying to help others, there was a great deal of beauty in that, and there's a lot of those kinds of stories in this book. And I personally think that this is the best book about 9/11 that's been written. So that's, yeah. And I'm going to move on to, let's see, Beauty and Incompleteness. And at first I thought about maybe doing an incomplete series or an incomplete book. And the ones that came to mind were Patrick O'Brien's Aubrey Maturin series, which I love. It was left uncompleted because Patrick O'Brien died. And then there was Edgar Allan Poe's The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym, which is just incredible, but for some reason, or I thought it was incredible when I read it. Others may think otherwise, but Poe never finished it, and then he kind of tacked on a really odd ending. But instead, I thought of this book right here, which is Nicholson Baker's The Mezzanine, which is about a young man. He's kind of my age, I guess. He's college educated. He works at an office in a like a skyscraper, I guess. And this entire book is him going down to get lunch and then riding the escalator back up to the mezzanine. But there's a quote in here that just made me think about incompleteness in general, and I'm going to read that. This is, I believe he's thinking about a time he was on a subway and thinking about something that happened to him that morning. And this was when I realized abruptly that as of that minute, impossible to say exactly which minute, I had finished with whatever large-scale growth I was going to have as a human being, and that I was now permanently arrested at an intermediate stage of personal development. I did not move or flinch or make any outward sign. Actually, once the first shock of raw surprise had passed, the feeling was not unpleasant. I was set. I was the sort of person who said actually too much. I was the sort of person who stood in a subway car and thought about buttering toast, buttering raisin toast even, when the high, crisp scrape of the butter knife is muted by occasional contact with the soft, heat-blimped forms of the raisins, and when, if you cut across a raisin, it will sometimes fall right out, still intact though dented, as you lift the slice. I was the sort of person whose biggest discoveries were likely to be tricks to applying toiletries while fully dressed. I was a man, but I was not nearly the magnitude of man I had hoped I might be. And when I first read this book, I was like, what? But this book has really, really stayed with me over the years, and I need to reread it. I've enjoyed this tag because it's forced me to go back and look at these books that I haven't looked at in quite some time. Let's see, the next one is Beauty in Place. And for that I chose a story in this book. This is an NYRB, The Color Out of Space, Tales of Cosmic Horror. And the story I chose was Algernon Blackwood's The Willows, which is another, it has another great opening line I think of sometimes. After leaving Vienna, and long before you come to Budapest, the Danube enters a region of singular loneliness and desolation, where its waters spread away on all sides regardless of a main channel, and the country becomes a swamp for miles upon miles, covered by a vast sea of low willow bushes. On the big maps, this deserted area is painted in a fluffy blue, growing fainter in color as it leaves the banks, and across it may be seen in large straggling letters the word Sumpf, meaning marshes. In high flood, this great acreage of sand, shingle beds, and willow-grown islands is almost topped by the water, but in normal seasons the bushes bend and rustle in the free winds, showing their silver leaves to the sunshine in an ever-moving plain of bewildering beauty. These willows never attain to the dignity of trees. They have no rigid trunks. They remain humble bushes with rounded tops and soft outline, swaying on slender stems that answer to the least pressure of the wind, supple as grasses, and so continually shifting that they somehow give the impression that the entire plain is moving and alive. For the wind sends waves rising and falling over the whole surface, waves of leaves instead of waves of water, green swells like the sea too, until the branches turn and lift, and then silvery white as their underside turns to the sun. And this is a very atmospheric story of two friends who are on a boating trip down the Danube River, and they camp on an island, and they encounter a strange force that they don't understand, and it doesn't understand them. And if you've never read it, I would really recommend it, because it's been one of my favorite stories for many years. So the next one is Beauty in Time. And so that's kind of the beauty of the passage of time and people in the passage of time. So the book that I chose is R.F. Delderfield's To Serve Them All My Days, which is just a spectacular novel. It's about a young man who has been injured in World War I. It's now 1917 or 1918, I believe. And he has shell shock. And he's really bothered, and he's really, really messed up by the war. And he's searching for peace. And someone suggests to him that there is a job opening as a teacher at an English public school, what we in the United States would call a private school. I've never understood that distinction, really. I know the history of it, but it's still kind of odd. So his name is, I cannot remember his first name, but his last name is Powlett Jones. Mr. Powlett Jones, right? Let me look. Yes, David Powlett Jones. and he goes to teach at this school, and it's just a beautiful book. He finds meaning in his life at this school. He finds friends. He finds love. He experiences tragedy. He goes on to see his students grow up, and he advances in his own position. And then, of course, 1939 comes, and he watches as, you know, the boys that he taught and the boys that he basically raised, because of, you know, it's a boarding school, sign up to go to war. And it's just a great book. It's kind of big, but if you've never read it, it's really good. I was really surprised by how much I liked this. And then we come to the last book, or the last prompt, rather, which is Beauty and Catharsis. And this was the one that I had the hardest trouble with, and of course that I forgot to mark. No, I didn't. I marked it. So, when I was young, when I was 16, I was going through a really, really rough patch in my life that I'm not going to really go into. And I found, I bought this book new. This is a book I actually bought new about a year before, and I hadn't read it. And then, like I said, I had a really rough patch in life, and for some reason, I really don't know why, I picked this book up and I read it, and it has stuck with me ever since. And it's All the King's Men by Robert Penn Warren, which people will tell you is the great American political novel, or the greatest American political novel ever written. But that's not what stood out to me at the time, and it's not what stands out to me now. This book is a great deal more than that. This book is a great love story, for one thing. It's beautifully written. Penn Warren had just an amazing skill with words. But I think of it in terms of catharsis, because when I was about 20, I wrote a book. I wrote a novel, and it was you know, a fictionalized memoir of my own events in life, and it's never been published. I'm never going to publish it, but it was really one of the best things that I ever did. It allowed me to process my thoughts, and the reason, and to unburden myself, you know. And the reason I think of this book is because it's told from the point of view of Jack Burden, who falls into the orbit of the Governor Willie Stark. And it's also about his mother and his father, the judge that lives next door, and Adam and Ann Stanton, who are the children of one of the former governors. I think this book takes place in Louisiana, and because it's based on Governor Huey Long. I don't really know a whole lot about Huey Long. I know a little. But it's told by Jack Burden. The narrator is Jack Burden. And it's basically him looking back on these events that have happened, and how he and Ann Stanton went through all these events, and that now they're past it. And I'm not going to give any spoilers, so that just it just strikes me as cathartic, a kind of a cathartic experience to get this off his chest. But I could be wrong. I'm a little bit uncertain as which book I should have chosen for this category. But I'm going to read a passage. After my visit to Ann Stanton's apartment that morning in late May, I was out of town for a while, about 8 days. I left her apartment that morning and went down to the bank and drew out some money and got my car out of the garage and packed a bag and was headed out. I was headed out down a long bone-white road, straight as a string and smooth as glass and glittering and wavering in the heat and humming under the tires like a plucked nerve. I was doing 75, but I never seemed to catch up with the pool, which seemed to be over the road just this side of the horizon. Then, after a while, the sun was in my eyes, for I was driving west. So I pulled the sunscreen down and squinted and put the throttle to the floor and kept on moving west. For west is where we all plan to go someday. It is where you go when the land gives out and the old field pines encroach. It is where you go when you get the letters saying, "Flee, all is discovered." It is where you go when you look down at the blade in your hand and the blood on it. It is where you go when you are told that you are a bubble on the tide of empire. It is where you go when you hear that there's gold in them thar hills. It is where you go to grow up with the country. It is where you go to spend your old age. Or it is just where you go. It was just where I went. And this book, I've never reread it since I was 16, which was 15 years ago now, believe it or not. But I've loved it ever since. And I sometimes think about rereading it, but I'm afraid that maybe it'll kind of taint my vision of it when I first read it, so I haven't reread it. I just reread quotes from it every now and then, and I think about this book all the time. I've memorized parts of this book, which is, I have a terrible memory for quotes, but this book has stayed with me. And Penn Warren, there are problematic elements in this book. Penn Warren was a white Southerner. You know, this book came out in 1946, and there is a racial insensitivity to this book that was casual and thoughtless on Penn Warren's part. My focus is just on the beauty of the prose. And I think that one of the best people on Booktube who speaks about problematic elements in writers is Michael K. Vaughan. Michael K. Vaughan speaks about problematic authors so much better than I'll ever be able to. And you know, I'll leave a link to the video, Michael's video, if I can find it. You know, in definitely reading these older books, you're going to run into problematic elements. And it's for every reader to determine what they will and will not read. But I can say that beyond those problematic elements that exist in this book, it's beautifully written. So, yeah, okay, that's my The Beauty in Books tag. And I want to thank to readers it may concern for tagging me and for my first tag. And yeah, thank you, and I'll see you next time.